I do think that there's an extraordinary wealth of stories that have not been told. You know, lots of airmen and lots of the army have told their story, and indeed there have been lots of sort of navy stories. But the submarine service has been the silent service.
May the 2nd, 1982, the event which made inevitable an all-out shooting war over the Falklands, the sinking of the Argentine heavy cruiser Belgrano.
My association with the Conqueror goes back 30 years. I was a producer on ITV's investigative current affairs programme World in Action, and the Falklands War was on. I guess it was a couple of years later that the controversy over the sinking of the Argentine cruiser Belgrano really sort of reached its height. The government had lied about the circumstances of the sinking, and it was a huge political controversy because the truth was coming out week by week. And it emerged that politicians criticising the government were using as their source a diary which had been written by an officer on board the submarine, the Conqueror. So every journalist in Britain was running around trying to find this diarist, and I was lucky enough to find him.
Mr. Sethier, did you leak your diary to any Member of Parliament or to the media?
No, I did not.
No. Was it ever your intention that operational material from your diary should have been made public?
Certainly not, no.
2nd of May. This afternoon I knew what fear was. At 1400 we received a signal authorising us to sink the Belgrano, even though it was outside the exclusion zone.
The order was given to fire. A torpedo was discharged. A number of seconds later the order was again given to fire. A weapon was discharged, and a number of seconds later the order was again given to fire, and a third weapon was discharged. There then elapsed a period of seconds before the first weapon hit its target, at which time an explosion was heard and felt. And shortly after that, another weapon was heard to hit and explode, and at the time we thought that the third one had hit and explode, but this was presumably ammunition stocks on the Belgrano exploding, and it became difficult to differentiate between what was a weapon and what was on-board ammunition exploding.
Well, on top of all of the conspiracy and sort of unravelling the government story, everybody was amazed to learn that a logbook from on board the Conqueror, the control room log, had gone missing.
The submarine's navigating officer also kept a control room log which records the latitude and longitude, distance run, course speed and depth of the submarine at hourly intervals together with other routine readings. It has been mislaid, and as it too is classified, a board of inquiry is being held.
I was told that the reason that the logbooks had gone missing was probably not so much to do with what had happened with the Belgrano, but actually what had happened to the submarine when it got back from the Falklands War. And obviously what it did was to resume its role in the Cold War against the Soviet Union. And in order to understand this operation, you've just got to go back a little bit further. The British and the Americans had very advanced technology in underwater detection. And there was a piece of equipment that was called a towed array sonar, and this was basically a listening device that submarines or trawlers would tow behind their vessel and would enable a kind of triangulated way of listening to the enemy. So it was able to position the enemy from a long way off. Very sophisticated piece of equipment. And the British and the Americans were a long way ahead in this technology than Eastern Bloc. All of a sudden, it seemed that the Soviet Union had the same piece of equipment. And so the question arose in the British and American minds, was it an amazing coincidence that the Soviets had managed to develop exactly the same piece of kit, or did they in fact have a spy somewhere in the British or American research? So it was determined that the only way of finding this out would be to see whether we could obtain a version of this towed array sonar that was being used by the Soviets. Well, the only way you could do that would be to creep up behind a Soviet submarine or trawler that was using the thing and see whether you could capture it. So what was extraordinary was that before the Falklands War, the Conqueror had been chosen to be the vessel that would try to carry out this extraordinarily difficult and sensitive operation. They were sent off very quickly after the war into the North Atlantic to try to get this piece of equipment. And what happened then is in fact the information, the operation that has remained top secret and remains top secret to this day. The operation was called Operation Barmaid, and it was so called because the Conqueror was fitted with two pincer-like sort of cutting devices, like arms, out of the front of the submarine. And the idea was that it would sneak up behind a submarine or a trawler that was using the towed array sonar and cut the cable and bring this thing back. And when the Conqueror returned from the Falklands War, we got information that a couple of Polish trawlers, as it happens, were operating in the Barents Sea and using one of these towed arrays. So the equipment was hurriedly fitted to the Conqueror. The Conqueror set off and located these submarines, and then, over a period of several hours, they tracked the trawler, crept up underneath and behind it, managed amazingly to locate the cable, in fact did cut the cable. Divers went out and managed to obtain this Soviet towed array, installed it into the British submarine Conqueror and brought it back. So it was an absolutely amazing achievement on the part of the Navy. Mrs. Thatcher was completely delighted, actually was quoted as saying, "Thank goodness it was one of our submarines that did it." And whenever the name Conqueror was mentioned in the Pentagon, for years and years afterwards, people were absolutely amazed that this British submarine had been able to pull off this extraordinary operation. One of the reasons I wanted to tell this story is that when people think about the Cold War, they think about cruise missiles and all of the visible paraphernalia. The interesting thing is that the Cold War was probably won as much under the water as it was anywhere else. It was a genuine military secret. It was and is still classified at the highest level of security. And so, if you told the story, you'd go to prison. It was frustrating, but also, so I just quite literally tucked it away in the back of my mind. And every 10 years or so thought, I wonder whether we can tell this story yet, and knew that we wouldn't be able to. Finally, we can.